You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Amy Kelly of Devereux. Amy is the mother of 3, including a daughter with autism, and has dedicated her career to helping families navigate the complex systems their children rely on. Today, we're exploring what meaningful inclusion looks like for families and what caregivers need to know on how to advocate effectively for their children. Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Well, it's my pleasure. I think being able to advocate for oneself, for one's family, and have a voice has become more and more important. And the concept of self-advocacy and being able to really drive a decision, that's not new, but it's been on the precipice over the last maybe 6 years where people have really encompassed that as part of the service delivery.
Agreed.
But before we go there, I'd love for you to just give us a little bit of background about your family and what brought you to this work, because obviously passion has a responsibility in helping you get to us.
Yeah, for sure. I am a mom of 3. They were young adults now. Zanny's 25, Annie's 24, Ryan's 22. And Annie was diagnosed just before she turned 2. So I've been dealing with this a long time now. And I've seen some changes over the years, which has been nice. Not as fast as probably as a parent, I would hope to see, but we're making progress. Annie is diagnosed with autism and an intellectual disability and has a few other things, verbal apraxia, so it's hard for her to speak. She uses a device to kind of clear things up if you can't understand her. And she does know how to read and write, which is awesome. They weren't sure she would ever be able to learn that. And she did after she was 10 years old. And so I would encourage every family out there who is struggling with a minimally speaking or a non-speaking, loved one to just don't give up on them. There's no limit to what they can learn at what age. They don't stop learning, right? They're on their own timeline. So, and so I got involved in the work because Devereux, where I work, saved my family. We had to find an appropriate school for Annie when she was 5, and Devereux was the only school that really was a good fit for her. It was an approved private school, which is different than a private school. It means that the county pays for it, but it's sort of a last resort when they can't fill the child's needs with the regular education programs in your county or in your area. So she started there and started to make progress and learned how to communicate with PECS, if you're familiar with that, picture exchange communication system, and then just started learning life skills, and it was just incredible to see. And it also gave my family a place to be accepted and be able to show up and meet other parents and not feel ostracized or judged. And my sons had other friends there that they could hang out with that understood, like, okay, we can't eat in a restaurant, right? That's just how it is for our family. So, and Devereux really absolutely saved us and gave us a different perspective, thank goodness, because I was really treading water. I was a single mom at the time, and it was just so hard. I could barely keep my head above water. So I started as director of community services, and it was a position I sort of noticed the need for and created once Annie was in the program, and then I grew to a director of Pennsylvania, and Devereux was in 12 states. So I back in 2019 was promoted to national director, where I help all of our states and families and individuals. And a lot of what I do is, like you said, navigation of systems of care. it is also advocacy for families and our individuals, and that can be at the local or the state or the federal level. Yeah, it's
Well,
a terrific organization.
it sounds like every single part of that had family somewhere integrated in your response. And it makes sense, is that family engagement is so important, and it's a two-way street. It's not just the family that's being put out there. Somebody needs to support the process, open doors, allow for networks, allow for community. So in the terms of family engagement, is that I'm sure you've conceptualized this over the years, is that it's got to have a meaning. So for Devereux, what does that family engagement really mean?
Yeah, what I love is at Devereux, we have something called the Family Standard. And that means if you, as an employee, aren't willing to bring your child to Devereux, then we're not doing our job right. And so that is sort of our standard that every employee there that works hard enough, right, and also feels comfortable enough that they would bring their own family. And I live that every day, right? I mean, Annie still is there. She's in an adult day program there now because she's over the age of 21, and she's just continues to, excel and learn new skills. And that's why I, again, encourage families just to not think that learning and absorbing sort of what our culture and communities provide to our individuals, don't think that stops. They understand, and that goes for the community too. They understand, and so please remember that when you're talking about self-determination and choice and voice, that is all so important to offer that, particularly as they get old enough to start making some decisions. And it could be a little decision, right? Like, do you want to wear the blue shirt or the red shirt? But
Hmm.
giving them choices is so important and letting them have decisions.
But I mean, the empowerment of an autistic individual, then going from youth all the way through adulthood, is that you have to really truly understand who that individual is, where their strengths come in, who their community support network is, and it is a holistic approach.
Yes,
So when you're
absolutely.
looking at family engagement, if you were to give just, those core things that everybody should be at least putting in the forefront of all decisions, or building into a program that allows for integrated decision making, everybody's involved in the process, or whether that is being able to create the appropriate level of supports, not just in what you're delivering, but in the way you're approaching it. Like, what are those core pieces that you'd say, when you're developing a plan and you're developing an organization to help really empower children through adults who identify
Uh-huh.
autistic, these things need to be in there to really
Yeah,
engage.
absolutely. I think the first one I would say is think outside of the box because it has to be individualized. So just like you're saying, we can't have a cookie cutter plan, treatment plan, or IEP or ISP when they're over 21. We can't have a cookie cutter version of that. You need
Hmm.
to really cater it to each individual and what their needs are. I think making sure that the services that are being provided are evidence-based. I'm a big one on that. There's a lot floating out there right now, and I think it, really, if our families stick to evidence-based practices, that's the way to go at this point, where they can be sure that they are effective and not harmful in any way. Um,
Hmm.
and then, making sure that one, the family is seen as an equal team member, and that their clinical team respects them and includes them in all of those decisions, I think is just so important. And all of that goes into family engagement.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned including, and that idea of full inclusion goes with decision making. It goes with, how things are done, where things are
Yeah.
done, the approach. So when you're talking about that individualization and what real inclusion looks like
Mhm.
versus what families may often be handed, what is that distinction?
Yeah, inclusion is it's one of those words that kind of I feel in my heart when I say it because it's a hard one for our families. We're often excluded. One, because we are different, and sometimes people just don't know how to act around us or how to talk about autism. I remember people, when Annie was first diagnosed, saying like, well, are the boys normal? Because they didn't know how to talk about autism, right? And normal certainly isn't the right term
Yeah.
either, but neurotypical maybe. But we all, I think, have, a toe on the spectrum somewhere, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but inclusion it goes everything from like when you have a child who might be mainstreamed into school and in an autistic support classroom. Inclusion isn't just putting them in the gym for the assembly once a month to say that they were with the other, neurotypical children. It's really getting them involved with them. And
Mm-hmm.
we see so often that they aren't included to that max. It
Mm-hmm.
is them being invited to the birthday parties, even though they're different. And that was a tough one for me, not birthday parties in particular, but friendships, because Annie really didn't grow up having friends. Engaged with the kids in her class, but they don't form the same connections.
Mm-hmm.
Now that she's an adult, I would tell you that a lot of my friends are her former clinicians, and she sees them as her friends as well, and they embrace her as a friend, which
Mm-hmm.
is so lovely because
Yeah.
that's very meaningful to her. I see it when she is part of our, girl group or girl hangout. So, um,
Mm-hmm. I've heard
so
from so many families
yeah,
as well, Amy, on that issue is that if I were to ask a majority of families what's the most important thing for you out of treatment for your child, is that almost every single one of them is looking for some form of social connection,
yeah,
whether that's with a best friend, whether that's with them themselves, or
right,
that's just a way to be really integrated to collaborate and be a piece of making something stronger in their
yes,
relationships. And
yes,
I think that's so important. When you mentioned being in the room versus really participating in something, have you heard stories where families, or maybe even for yourself, where they've either run into being almost a barrier kept where people just say, no, it's just not right for you. There's no way you could be a part of this. Or the opposite, where it's like, okay, well, here you go. Sink
and
or
too
swim.
much, right? And not
Uh-huh.
helping. Yeah, right. Absolutely. I mean, I've worked with thousands of families over the last 20 years, and um, I I have seen everything, everything. I've seen it with my own daughter, even in preschool. She was in a preschool program that they they really didn't let parents come in to observe until Thanksgiving party day. And I went in and Annie was in a corner by herself just crying. And I said, is this how it is normally? And the teacher said, yes, this is all she does. And like it was my fault, first of all. And I said, why has no one informed me about this? Because we don't want this placement if this is how it is. And she was very bitter. And one thing I learned, though, was so many people said that this was a longtime teacher not to mess with. And I thought, oh, what does that mean? Because, I part of me wanted to go to the school district and make a formal complaint. But the other part of me realized I have 18 years to work with the school district or 21 years, right? And that I need to really, keep things peaceful. So that's one example. I have also had families that have had it the other direction where they have just dumped them in the gym and said, or at even during lunch, right? Lunch and recess and gym are all those really hard social kind of decisions. And it's sort of like the kid that for them, it's every day is dodgeball and they're the last kid picked, and if you can think back to when you were a kid, first of all, I hated dodgeball. I'll just be honest. But I also remember like you was like, please somebody pick me not last, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be last. And I think that is what it feels like. We can all relate to that on some level of feeling uncertain about where we stand with the rest of the people or feeling different. So regardless of your level of autism, if you're level 1, 2, or 3, Annie being a 3, more profound
Mhm.
autism. Um, I think it doesn't matter. Inclusion is important everywhere, and that self-dignity is important everywhere. Respect, all the things that we want for our neurotypical kids are exactly what our autistic kids need.
Yeah. And I mean, in order to really experience inclusion, it takes being individual in the resources and understanding what levels of support are going to create success within that inclusive process. So most of that, at least in a school setting, is done through the IEP. You have a lot of resources in that room, but it's getting everybody really working
On the
together
same
collaboratively
page.
and keeping a voice. So families that walk into that oftentimes feel undermatched and not necessarily as if they're the ones that could be guiding the process.
Yeah.
What do they need to know to feel a little bit more confident?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is intimidating, I'll say, until you get the hang of it or until you start to really form those collaborative partnerships with the
Mhm.
districts. My first suggestion is have all of your information about your child. So doctor reports, treatment plans that you may have had, speech therapy reports if you've done outside speech therapy or OT or PT. Have all of those in a binder, and on the front of the binder have a big, beautiful picture of your child. Because when you walk into that IEP room, I have done this, but I've held up the binder and I said, I just want everybody to remember that we're talking about Annie today. And I show her picture because often for these teachers, it's like IEP meeting after IEP meeting, right? And
Mhm.
kid after kid. And you really want to distinguish, this is my child. This isn't a child. This is my
Yeah.
child, right? And every child is just as important, right? I think also, sit next to the head person in the special ed, on the special ed team. Sit next to them if you can. Um, I encourage our Devereux staff to make sure that we spread out so it's not Devereux on one side of the table and then the family and an advocate on the other, right? That's really not partnership, right? And so
Mhm.
I think as much as we can make things collaborative, the better. I had even
Mhm.
brought in donuts, one morning thanking them for coming in early. Our IEP meetings were long. Like we had 3-hour IEP meetings because Annie had, 60 some page IEPs.
Yeah.
Um, and so also being appreciative and understanding their perspective of things is
Mhm.
helpful. I think what I learned is that it's not us against them necessarily, even though it feels like that so often. And as a provider, I can say I'm one of the theys when I put my provider hat on, have a specific job to do. And that's what they're focused on. And as the parent, you are focused, as you should be, on your number one, your child. And so you are there, but you have to understand that they also are juggling a million other, kids or um, just goals or whatever they're being measured on. And so I
Mhm.
think when you can remember that they have a lot going on, plus they have their own personal lives. They could have a kid on the spectrum, just like, we do. So I think remembering you don't know everything behind closed doors is important.
It is so important to realize that it isn't a us versus them, is that people typically don't want to hold back the right resources.
Right.
But I do see at times that there are challenges, and I see it almost like a siloed viewpoint versus a collaborative viewpoint. And how do you break down those
Yeah.
two things? But as a family member, is that you are going to occasionally have to push back. You know your child. You've also
Oh,
been that
you are
conduit of
the expert.
information between everybody forever.
Yep,
Um, so when those do come up, it's easy to be labeled as the difficult parent.
it
Um,
is.
how do you
I don't
avoid
like that
that?
label. Yeah. So first of all, if I ever hear staff say that, I'm like, let's just sit down for a second because
Mhm.
there is no difficult parent. It's a difficult situation, right?
Yeah.
Just like there is no bad kid. It's a kid that's in a bad circumstance, right? If it's behavioral or has a diagnosis, right? And is trying to learn how to communicate.
Yeah.
Um, I think you have to be firm in what you want, but also reasonable. And it's the whole saying about you get more flies with honey than vinegar or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And so being firm is different than being aggressive, being
Hmm.
firm or assertive. And and then back up why you're asking for what you want, because the school district is really looking at funding. That's their number one thing that they're focused on, right? Is making sure they have enough funds to provide for all of the kids that have needs in that county. And you need to back up why your child needs these particular services. And I would always say, listen, I'm not asking for the world. I'm not asking for everything for Annie. I'm asking for XYZ because I'm her mom. I know what she needs. Maybe you have tried it at home. What we did often was we would hire privately someone to try a service. And when we saw some progress, we would also videotape it. When we saw progress, we could actually bring it to our county and show them the progress over the course of 6 months, right? We'd have little clips, and there was no arguing at that point. It was just very obvious. So
Probably motivates people as well, I'm guessing, to see,
yes,
wow, this is what's capable, and
yes,
this is what that child is. This is all the potential that they have. Like they can
yeah.
they can do so much.
And it was incredible for me to see, because when you're living with them, right, day to day, you don't see all of
Hmm.
those little things that they're doing. But when you view them over the course of time, it's really so incredible to see that progress. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now the IEP process is it's at times can be pretty regimented.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's templated a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, and there's very kind of clear ways of going through things, which gets to a lot of answers. But
Yes.
there's always some questions that are left out, or some answers that maybe have not been really thought through because they are outside of the box.
Yeah.
What what are some of those things that you'd say, hey, as a family member, you should always be asking at least these certain things, just because they might not always flow with the
Yeah.
template.
Yeah, for sure. So when and I think it depends on where your child falls on the spectrum. I'll give you an example for more profound or level three, and then
Hmm.
I'll walk it down a little bit. Um, I would suggest that you think about having an aide on a school bus for that child, because if they have any kind of communication difficulty, they can't communicate with the bus driver, right? So there needs to at least be one aide, if not designated to your child on a
Hmm.
school bus. Ask about communication devices being covered, right? Is that iPad covered by the school district? And is it available and portable back and forth? Because
Yeah.
it doesn't help if a child has an IEP or an iPad communication program in school and one at home, but not on the bus, right? That's like
Hmm.
taping someone's
Got
mouth.
to travel with your voice box.
Exactly, exactly. So there has to be a way to fill that in, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, those are really important. I think you can ask about potty training and hiring a specialist for potty
Hmm.
training. People don't think about that, but Annie didn't potty train till she was 10, and it was her school staff that wrote it out with me. We stayed up till it had to be midnight, I think, in her room, kind of waiting her out and helping her until it clicked, right? And God bless them. They were the kindest, most dedicated staff, again at Devereux, why I wanted to work there, right? Because
Hmm.
this is the kind of treatment I got. Um, then when you look more at the level two or level one, I think about social skills as one thing. So thinking about summer camps and ESY. ESY should be for all kids that need it, that have an IEP, I believe.
Hmm.
And often families don't take advantage of it because it interferes with vacation, or they just they want to have the break, but
Yeah.
that break can sometimes lead to regression, and
Hmm.
that regression is hard to make up for at the beginning of the new school year. So thinking about even intermittent, ESY, if it's 2 weeks in June, 2 weeks in July, 2 weeks in August, something like that. Private tutor is an option. And these are things that you need to think about. Like if you notice your child has missed speech therapy from, um, you know, during school year or during COVID, the school owes you speech therapy. And so that's a way that you can make that up, is by having a private tutor, or, having someone come to your home. When I talk about summer camps, there's lots of cool summer camps now, like Lego camps and other things to promote social skills, which is often one of the hardest, skill sets for someone who's, on that, I'll say, lower support need scale, level 1 or 2. And so there's a lot of ways that you can be creative about how to expose them to more social skills, and that you can write in an IEP, especially if the school is saying, well, we don't have a social skills class, so we can't do that. Oh, well, listen, I have this camp or this weekend program that we can go to, right? Do a little research on the web. There are a ton. There are online ones, which often can be a nice introductory way to do it, especially if your child has anxiety and social anxiety. Doing it online is an option. I do think we need in-person services to come back a little bit more and more robust, because there's no replacement for in-person interaction, right? And so, thinking about that as your child moves forward. And you have to think about, you can think about your 8-year-old right now, but you have to think about when they're 22 and they no longer will be in the school system. And that's a part of the crummy part, I think, for our families, is that we have to think so far ahead in the future. And we really do, because there's so much planning to do.
There it is. And just the transition across each step of life brings about a whole different kind of ball of issues that you're going to be working through, whether it's with a neurotypical child or a neuroatypical child. That's right. A neurodiverse child. Yeah. But you can't compartmentalize this. You gave so much that a family is constantly thinking about and trying to be able to empower their child, which means that their brain is 24/7 trying to figure out, how can I support my children the best they can. But these are oftentimes families that the family is not just a parent with one child, is that we're talking about a family unit. So despite the fact, and I empathize with the fact that you always have to be almost on to be able to advocate for your child, is how do you support the sibling who's growing up in the middle of all of this kind of planning, and I'd say chaos, but it's organized chaos.
Sure. And hopefully it's organized chaos, because all kids do better with a schedule, right? And so having that home schedule is so important for all of your children, I would tell every parent. So, when you think about siblings, sometimes you have siblings that are on the spectrum too. And so you might have one that is more, has higher support needs than the other, and you're trying to juggle all of that, right? And also, I think our families today live in this sandwich generation where we're also caring for our elderly parents, right? Yeah. So you have the parents, and then you have your children, and where's the time for you? It's really hard to find that. As far as siblings go, though, there are a few tips, I think. One is, I always asked every therapist that came to our home, so this was when Annie was little and she would get services at home, but to include her brothers in with the therapy as much as possible. It made them feel needed. It showed, it taught their sister skills, right? It showed, because the two boys did it together, it showed how to interact with another child. And they felt part of Annie's success. There's also something called SIB shops, and that is a wonderful way to expose your, neurotypical siblings to other neurotypical siblings. And if they're in your area, you just Google SIB shops. That's the SIBSHOPS. That's the trade name, and they basically offer like a play date for neurotypical sibs to hang out. They usually have a snack and they'll do an activity, but there's a trained therapist there who can get them to sort of talk about their feelings. And I remember the first time Danny, my oldest, came out of a sib shop, and he said, "Mom, I met this girl and she has a brother with Down syndrome and they can't eat in restaurants either." And he felt so validated, right? And when I think about what I felt when Annie went to Devereux Cares for the first time, and I was embraced by these parents who kind of came before me that had older kids, this is exactly what Danny felt, So it was amazing. It's very powerful. Validation is huge. So I think those are important things. Therapy in general, I am a big supporter of. I know, it can be stigmatizing, but I think being open-minded and thinking about, that sibling goes through some of the same emotions that that parent goes through, but it's in the younger version, right? So they could be feeling sort of the sadness of not having a neurotypical sibling that they're going to hang out with, or I know Danny and Ryan have often said they were so grateful to have each other. Annie is in the middle of them, but they learn to be best buds and kind of get through stuff together and really not have resentment against their sister, which is pretty incredible. I feel lucky, and I feel like I did something right there. I don't know exactly what.
Well, one thing that I emphasize personally to a lot of families is you can't feel bad also to say, I'm going to go have one-on-one time with one of the other children today. And you should do that. Like, why not? You would do that in other situations, but that's when it's so important for a team
That's right.
to be available, to
So
allow you that chance.
Yeah, to have respite, whether it's from your mother-in-law or you hired a babysitter or a mother's helper down the street. But I also did that. I would have date time with each child, and even Annie, right? And we called it date time. It didn't always go great. It was sometimes hard, which was sad for me because I wanted to have mother-daughter date time, right? And I learned a lot of missing those things that my friends were doing with their daughters. But it's part of the process of acceptance, I think, and really accepting your child and their diagnosis fully. And it takes a long time to get there.
No, it does. And it takes a lot of work. And I mean, you have a gas tank that isn't always on full. It gets to empty.
Totally.
And providers play a role in this. And if you were to say one thing to schools or providers that could really change the dynamic that they have with families to really help them feel supported and empowered, what's the one thing that if you had the global audience of all of those people that you'd want them to walk away with?
I mean, it's really simple, actually. I would love for them first to start with the parent and say, how are you? How are you doing? And how can we support you? Nobody asks about the parent, how they're doing. Everything's focused on the child. And the parents won't complain about that because we want it to be about the child. But when people don't check in with us, we forget about our own mental health and self-care. And it's hard to allow yourself to care for yourself because you think you should be caring for your child all the time. I know I had a ton of guilt when I would do something for myself. If I wasn't reading about autism or researching autism or doing something with the boys, right? I had guilt about doing anything for myself. So I just think the simple question of how are you doing and how can we help you? Support the whole family. I mean, autism is a family diagnosis, and because this is for life, right? And all these stages that we're talking about, the parents and the siblings are involved with everything, every step of the way. And so really checking in to see, and then what that means is if you're going to ask, can I help you? It means having a resource library of some kind, right? To be able to refer them to a specialist or provide them with, a guide with terminology or how to sign up for Medicaid, whatever it is, the situation, right? There's so many different things, but really thinking about how to best support your families and what your environment is, what type of a school or program.
And I mean, and they call it a therapeutic relationship, or I mean, an educational relationship. It could be is for a reason. And simply by asking that question, you've now humanized every part of the process, which is important. Now you can look at every decision of this is what they're feeling through this process. This is how I can support this process, and this is how we work together to achieve it. Like it is so simple in concept, and it takes effort to get there, though. I mean, everybody has to be on that same page.
Yep.
You all at Devereux have been doing a lot of work to really broaden this dialogue over the years and to keep things moving forward. Where can we find more information that you all are working out, or in the states that you are, to receive the services?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at www.devereux, which is Devereux.org, you will find everything you need to know about us there.
Hmm.
We are almost a 115-year-old organization, and which we're very proud of. There's not a lot of nonprofits that have been around for that long, and we provide the highest quality clinical services and educational services, but we also provide consulting, and we provide community-based services, so like outpatient or prescriptive services. There's a lot, and telehealth is a thing now, right? So you can get some help from Devereux, even if you're not living right there. Often, if you're in the same state, you can, have telehealth services and that sort of thing. So I would just encourage families to visit us and see what we have, because even if you can't work with Devereux, you can look for other providers in your area, or get ideas about services that might help your child or adult that you could ask for in your area and
Well, I
advocate for.
I definitely appreciate everything that you all have been doing, Amy, and the focus that you're bringing on how to support the family through the process it's crucial. The more you can empower everybody involved,
Yeah.
the better prognosis you are going to get to empowerment. And it's one of those things that if we focus on those right things, we all get there. But thank you for coming on, and I hope that we get to talk in the future maybe about transitions and some of these moving to adulthood sort of concepts, because I
I'm
think that's
in.
also a really cool conversation that we can delve into.
It's a cool one and a tough one, let me tell you. I'm just recovering sort of, and I haven't completed the full transition because she still lives at home with me. So that's a whole nother thing, is the move out, right? Like that's tough
Absolutely.
too. Yeah, that'd
Well,
be great, Jeff. Thank you so much for having
yes,
me.
I appreciate it.
Me too.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.